Welcome back, guys. It's been a while, so let's recap. Loki Episode 1 established that the main MCU continuity has always been under the control of the TVA, an oppressive agency of time cops who enforce the events of the sacred timeline. According to the show, to deviate from the sacred timeline in any way, including something as trivial as being late for work, will create a branched timeline, which will eventually cause reality to collapse in on itself. So in order to prevent that, the TVA locate any offending variants and delete them from existence. Last time we discussed not only how this new law outright contradicts events of Infinity War and Endgame, but how it also retroactively strips each and every character within the MCU of their agency, robbing any significant pre-Endgame character choices of any dramatic weight. But for a more in-depth exploration of that, feel free to check out my first video. Now, some people aren't troubled by the notion that, up to the events of this show, all of their favourite MCU characters have only been able to act and develop in one way that was pre-approved by a faction of unseen time fascists. Some people don't get how characters choosing to take certain paths loses significance when you remove alternate paths from the equation. And some people are going to argue that you can't have drama and trashy superhero stories anyway, because we know that the protagonists are always going to win, so this new law doesn't really change anything. If these are your stances, I'm probably not the guy to sway you on them. Have at it and enjoy whatever it was you were enjoying, I guess. But for those who are troubled by any of these ideas, let's see what top quality world building the MCU had to die for. Now, first port of call, there is a scene from episode 1 that I neglected to discuss in my previous Loki breakdown, which I felt was important to bring up here as part of a running theme of this episode, because it's a perfect encapsulation of how ill-suited the TVA are to carrying out their primary function. Agent Mobius is in a 16th century French cathedral with a squad of Minutemen, investigating an incident where another squad were all stabbed to death during a routine check, with their reset charge stolen. Get used to seeing dead Minutemen, by the way. As infantry, they're complete dog shit, as showcased here, where we see that 4 trained Minutemen with full riot gear, melting sticks and TemPads can't compete with one assailant with, at most, 2 bladed weapons. So, right off the bat, we're confronted with the question of why these guys are the Timekeeper's first choice to enforce their will on the universe, instead of, say, I don't know, robots, which aren't automatically incapacitated by a bladed weapon to the squishy bits. Anyway, as Mobius surveys the murder scene, a noise startles one of the Minutemen, who sees a young French child, and, presumably identifying a target with a comparable fighting skill to his own, readies his melting stick and advances toward her. Luckily, Mobius stops him, and instead of opting to melt the child on the spot, utilises his average human intelligence to use a potential witness of the incident they're investigating as a source of information. But maybe if the TVA uniform had some kind of chameleon function that adapted their appearance to the relevant time period, Minutemen wouldn't be obliged to barbarically melt anyone unfortunate enough to become variants by the simple act of looking at them and their modern-looking, very conspicuous riot gear. That's a point, actually. What exactly is the utility in having a uniform that literally creates work for you? Maybe a chameleon function is something you could easily include in some kind of robot. And since you'd think that human agents would normally have a lot of qualms about killing children, well, I think I've made my point. Anyway, Mobius speaks French to the girl, calling his companion an imbecile, which is true, and the stupid TVA man very clunkily announces that he can also speak every language on the timeline. And minor point, but I feel like the 16th century French girl should really struggle to understand modern French. Like, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert here, but considering I'm a millennial and I barely understand Zoomer speak, I feel like 2000s English would be pretty impenetrable to King Henry VIII. Like I said, minor point. Anyway, Mobius decides to calm the child by drawing a stick man with his finger on a device, which then turns the drawing into an animated hologram before her very eyes. Now, Mobius is about to set off a reset charge, so this isn't actually as egregious as you might expect, because I think you'd want to be fucking careful doing that, especially when you've already been surprised at how many people are in this church. But it is still quite egregious. Like, do you really want to risk generating unnecessary amounts of Nexus energy, even temporarily, by showing her this technology before you've even got an answer to your questions? What if her 16th century mind can't actually process it and she has a breakdown or something? But no worries, this 16th century French peasant girl actually doesn't lose her mind at the sight of technology that would be revolutionary nowadays, but instead she smiles with vague amusement like she already saw this one on the 16th century French TikTok. Honestly, this show never ceases to amaze me. These interactions should be so simple to depict. But there goes Loki, not even trying to swing for the easiest of low balls. Mobius asks her who killed the dead Minutemen, and she points to a stained glass window of the devil, which I'm surprised exists, to be honest, but again, I'm not an expert. It's then that Mobius notices that the girl is chewing blue bubblegum, a clue which is very important for things to come, which is really lucky considering that general procedure for Minutemen seems to just be to kill everything in sight. He instructs his underlings to have it analysed. He then tells the girl to leave, and the squad set off a reset charge, disintegrating the crime scene and resetting the timeline back to normal, since that is what reset charges do. Why am I reiterating this? Why indeed. But with all that out the way, let's start with Episode 2. Episode 2 opens on a Renaissance fair in 1985 Wisconsin, wherein a squad of TVA agents teleport into the scene in full view of random people, swanning around in full riot gear with no attempt at subterfuge. Good start, lads. They're actually noticed by someone immediately for not being dressed properly, but walk across the fair, following their wrist devices into a big tent since they have detected a variant. They enter the tent, and one of the agents declare that they're not picking up any Nexus energy, which isn't how I thought this worked. To my understanding, a variant is someone who creates Nexus energy, so what were your instruments picking up to tell you there was a variant inside the tent if there's none here? Maybe it just dropped out and that's why they're commenting on that, but ultimately I'm not sure why this line is here and why we couldn't just have Nexus energy be present in the scene. It changes nothing. But speaking of Nexus energy, I guess it's not a problem for the sacred timeline that a 1985 person noticed 4 people in full riot gear who shouldn't be there walk out of a futuristic portal in the middle of a crowded Renaissance fair and walk into a tent and not come back out again. I guess that person wouldn't try and notify anyone of this. I guess she wouldn't mention it to a friend. I guess she doesn't follow them instead of doing something else she was supposed to be doing for the sacred timeline to run properly. I guess absolutely no one else noticed them in a public event with at least 100 attendants, against all fucking odds. And no, none of this did happen, and the TVA are intending to use a reset charge anyway. But each of these things could happen, and each individual action would generate its own Nexus energy, which could potentially accumulate very quickly, meaning that a Nexus event is becoming more and more likely the more the TVA is being seen in their stupid uniforms, with their stupid weapons, with their stupid futuristic portals. Considering that they're already investigating damage to the timeline, you'd think they wouldn't be damaging it more themselves by moving around as publicly as they possibly can. If they were acting as they logically should, the TVA could have just portaled into the tent and not been noticed whatsoever. But instead, this scene shows that if this is the usual search procedure for Minutemen, the sacred timeline is being preserved by little more than lucky chance at this point. But this is the problem with establishing that the timeline can be broken by something as small as being late for work, but not Thanos' snap, which affected trillions of people across the galaxy at random, which must have been an unbelievable administrative nightmare in terms of containing infinite alternate multiverses. This early in the show, the scale for what can cause a Nexus event is absolutely fucked, and makes the TVA's capacity to function effectively impossible to believe, especially when they seem to be barely trying to keep their primary function in mind themselves. A voice suddenly comes out over the tannoy, describing a great battle about to commence, with the princess as a prize, finishing by asking if evil will prevail, or are we holding out for a hero? Cue a fight scene against Bonnie Tyler's Holding Out for a Hero. Show, don't even try and emulate Shrek 2, you are not fit to lick cum off its immaculate green bellend. The squad leader, C-20, scouts the area by very tactically turning her back to a dark corner of the tent, and a hand materialises out of nowhere and puts her under a mind control spell, making C-20 walk up behind her teammate and snap his neck. This is noticed by only one of the 2 remaining agents, who, confused, says, "Commander?" then watches C-20 cross the room, grab a lance, and face her with lethal intent. The agent, despite all that time to prepare, seems to choose not to defend herself, instead flicking her melting stick wide and leaving herself absolutely open to a full thrust to the tits. The variant Loki then slits her throat from behind. It's times like these that I'm wondering how the TVA react when Thanos deviates from the sacred timeline, because I don't know how they'd even go about trying to melt him. That's the point. How do these guys deal with intergalactic entities within the sacred timeline? What if a space whale deviates from it? Do they still just send in 4 guys in riot gear? Why is the TVA designed this way, and why are their agents just average humans with access to only close combat weaponry, therefore making them so heavily limited in the context of everyone else in the MCU? They get killed by fucking fire in the previous episode. What could they do against Doctor Strange variants, or Thor variants, or Scarlet Witch, or Captain Marvel, or Spider-Man, or Hawkeye, or just anyone with access to ranged weaponry? You can't convince me that these guys consolidated infinite branches of the multiverse, or enforced the sacred timeline across all planets in existence. They can't fight, and they can't deal with any enemy that's standing too far away to be hit with a stick. The last agent finally notices something is amiss, and he has a little fight with C-20 until the spell forces her to pass out. He goes to check on her, then notices the variant Loki behind him, standing up to very obligingly run onto her sword, like all good Minutemen should. But regardless, the variant has killed every agent without a scratch, stolen a reset charge, and taken C-20's unconscious form through a portal. This is going to be a dense one, isn't it? Anyway, after the credits, we cut to the TVA, where Loki is reading a jet ski magazine for some reason. As if he'd care about jet skis when we saw in Thor 2 that Asgard has fucking flying longboats, but whatever. I imagine it's probably a crap setup for something later. Anyway, even though we've utterly obliterated any idea of stakes in the MCU, Miss Minutes wants Loki to establish some new ones. What happens when a Nexus event goes beyond the red line? It's when the TVA can no longer reset a Nexus event, which would lead to the destruction of the timeline and the collapse of reality as we know it. I wonder if alternate timeline Gamora's continued existence in 2023 after her death in 2018 is causing any red lines to flag up. But I guess someone being in a different timeline to the one they were born in is just a little variation. It's not like she's late for work or anything. Feeling the preposterousness of the premise settling in, Loki starts trying to hit Miss Minutes with a rolled up newspaper until she goes away, which works as a nice little microcosm for the show's attitude toward lore and continuity. Nice metaphor, Michael Waldron. Very self-aware. Mobius gives Loki a variant jacket, and we cut to a debriefing, where B-15 tells her team that C-20's squad went dark shortly after they jumped into the 1985 branch. Yep, the 1985 branch. Only one current Nexus event. Everyone in the entire cosmos is getting to work on time for the entire year. Wizards, aliens, everyone. Okay, I am going to stop going on about that. Anyway, there's been another ambush, and it's definitely the Loki variant, but which kind of Loki remains unknown. Loki ensures that the grunts know that it's the lesser kind, to be sure, meaningfully wiggling his eyebrows to indicate he really wants to impress them like the pathetic pandering sycophant he never has been until now. Remember when Loki had self-respect? Sure, you could make the point that he's trying to trick them to let their guard down, but I don't remember him acting so fucking child entertainer level goofy. Like, not even in the one made by fucking Taika. B-15 tells him to turn around so the team can see his variant jacket, prompting snickers from all present. She doesn't want them to forget what he is, a cosmic mistake. Even though without the Nexus event he created, the beloved sacred timeline couldn't exist as it does since it facilitates Endgame's story. But I digress. Mobius emphasises that they're not just looking for a time criminal, they're looking for a Loki, something they should all be familiar with, since the TVA has pruned off more Lokis than any other variant, including Frost Giant Loki, World Cup Loki, Hulk Loki, Rasputin Loki, and War Loki. And though there are differences, the common powers are shape-shifting, illusion projection, and it's here that Loki interrupts like a schoolgirl eager to impress his senpai, offering duplication casting. Mobius says he puts that under illusion casting, and Loki breaks out his trusty thesaurus to explain the differences between his abilities to this roomful of people he should absolutely have nothing but disdain for, who he is planning to trick and escape from, by giving them a better understanding of how his powers work. He finishes, and Mobius tells him to take a breath, further cementing Loki as a desperate tryhard. Mobius says the plan is to split up into two teams, one with himself and Professor Loki. One of the team asks why, and Mobius says that whoever the variant is, they haven't been able to find them. They need an expert. Loki takes the opportunity to announce the expert out as himself, and for fuck's sake. Cut to the next scene where Loki asks if he's getting a weapon. Mobius says no, and Loki points out that he'll have his magic again, asking if they're not afraid he'll betray them. Mobius says they're not worried, since Loki knows they'll catch him eventually, but Mobius also adds that betraying the TVA won't get him any closer to the Timekeepers. Loki's demeanour completely changes at the name drop, and he tries to confirm that a meeting with the Timekeepers is on the table, but as usual, Mobius doesn't give him a straight answer. Mobius, you keep seeming to forget that Loki's fucking strong, to the point that Cap couldn't go toe-to-toe with him, but he also has access to powerful illusion magic. If he's able to regain access to it, what precisely is stopping him from duplication casting when no one's looking, or faking his own death to dupe you later, or just killing all of you, then stealing a tempad and a uniform and finding the Timekeepers himself? The answer is fuck all. Fuck all is stopping him from doing this. He knows loads about the TVA right now. He could definitely cause you some problems. Your Minutemen may be aware that Loki is a variant, but every time we've seen them working in the field, they've proven they aren't exactly well trained in adapting to new and surprising circumstances, which is odd, considering the nature of their job is anticipating and preventing things deviating from set events. Also, you'll catch him eventually. The TVA are currently being fucking shat all over by a Loki variant with a tempad, a sword, and a box of fucking matches. Why do you think giving a new Loki, who knows about you, access to his magic again is a good idea? For all you know, Loki could be faking an interest in the Timekeepers. Shit, he could have faked having a breakdown to make you lower your guard. You of all people, as a self-described fan of Loki's life, should know this guy's a fucking threat who could waste all of you and escape the first chance he gets. You cannot bank on the Timekeepers keeping him in check. You should not be appealing to dick-waving that the TVA will catch him eventually, because Loki will rise to it and he will take pleasure in proving you wrong. You are not convincing me that you're in any way familiar with this character to any fucking degree. But by the same token, Loki is actually showing his hand here. An audience with the Timekeepers is exactly what he wants. The god of fucking mischief, everyone. Where in Avengers his plans and intentions were things only known to himself and could only be prized out of him by other skilled manipulators, here he seems to have forgotten what a poker face even is. God, this show is crap. Where's the intrigue in following characters who are just fucking brain dead? Anyway, back to swanning about in the Renaissance Fair in full riot gear, where the Nexus energy is at an apex. Guess the TVA are going to reset the damage from earlier, but again, surely you guys should be wearing some sort of disguise. Is it not a problem if people notice a second group of you disappearing into the same tent? What if you also get killed? The Nexus energy is now so high that you really don't need any more innocent bystanders following you and finding answers to questions like where that weird group of people went, what they were here for, why there are corpses in the big tent, where did they come from, was it that science fiction portal, how do they have that, are they from the future, oh boy, what's this console, a tempad, hey, there's no security on this thing at all, whee! Like seriously, would a chameleon function not be so much fucking cooler, as well as making infinitely more sense? Back in the tent, B-15 comments on how the variant Loki is taking hostages, behaviour that has not been exhibited before. One agent suggests that the variant pruned C-20, but B-15 says the variant could have never got the jump on her. And Loki begins to say something to the contrary, but is ignored and interrupted as B-15 instructs the squad to fan out and search for the variant, and to hurry up because they're 3 units until redline, meaning that the entirety of reality is about to collapse. The guards start to fan out and Loki tells them to stop. If they leave the tent, they'll all die too. Mobius asks what he sees, and Loki says he sees a scheme, and in that scheme he sees himself. They have a saying in Asgard, where there are wolf's ears, a wolf's teeth are near. It means to be aware of your surroundings, he explains, needlessly. Although I guess these are Minutemen, to be fair, so you do probably need to spell everything out. And it ends with Loki saying that this situation is absurd, because the Asgardian people were gullible fools, and that he, as the god of mischief, managed to exploit them by listening. I'm still not sure how this collection of statements line up, probably because you can't actually slap together a string of empty, pointless metaphors and expect them to share a through line, not that the writers of this show know that, apparently. But he's clearly up to something, or acting in retaliation to B-15's dismissal of him. But for some reason everyone just continues to let him talk, even with the impending destruction of the universe drawing closer and closer. B-15 tells him to hurry up, and Mobius tells her to give him a chance. Loki starts going into a theatrical rage, saying that the TVA remind him of the people of Asgard, drunk with power and blind to the truth. He says those they underestimate will devour them, just like they underestimate him and this lesser Loki, which is why they walk into one wolf's mouth after another. The agents ask for an order, and B-15, getting impatient with the incessant fucking metaphors for some reason, yells at Mobius. He hurries Loki, who says that the variant wants them to look for C-20. It's a trap, and the variant is waiting for them. He theorises the variant wants him, so they can work together to overthrow and rule the TVA. B-15 says there's only 1 unit left until reality is irreversibly destroyed. But despite this, Loki carries on, saying that as a servant of the sacred timeline, and knowing what he knows about the variant's tactics, promises that he can deliver the variant, with assurances that he won't be melted, and that he wants to talk to the Timekeepers at once, in the most limp-handed and unleveraged bargain in the history of his career as the god of mischief. Mobius's brain then re-engages and he realises that Loki's lying. B-15 angrily instructs him to reset the timeline, and we cut back to the TVA. Guys, this scene is fucking insane and should not have happened. The TVA should not be put into a situation where a threat to their lives stops them from preserving the sacred timeline. If B-15 is a high enough rank to command her own squadron, she should not have let this go on for so long. She has a stake in Mobius's investigation, since it's reasonable to assume that she doesn't want to lose any more of her colleagues to the Loki variant, but this should not outweigh the entire fabric of reality. So we return to, why are the TVA not robots? But seriously, Mobius and B-15 should both be fired for nearly letting reality fucking collapse for this. But no, looks like we won't be acknowledging the weight or consequences of this whatsoever. Mobius is in Judge Renslayer's office, where they discuss Mobius nearly letting reality collapse, and Renslayer puts all the blame squarely on Loki's shoulders, calling him insubordinate, stubborn, and unpredictable, which is odd since he gives information freely, resists no one, and whose previous trick just failed precisely because Mobius correctly predicted his motives. But maybe Renslayer's remembering someone else. Maybe someone with the same name. Renslayer says that towing around a variant is dangerous, rightly, but Mobius doubles down, saying that being around Loki has made him aware of his readiness to stall for time, which will help Mobius to understand the variant, even though, according to himself, Mobius already knows everything about Loki. So his reasoning for carting this Loki variant around endangering reality is now getting as thin as my patience for this fucking show. Anyway, Renslayer says she knows that Mobius has a soft spot for broken things, but Loki is an evil lying scourge, as is his role on the sacred timeline. Mobius offers that Loki may want to change, which is perplexing considering that he just nearly tricked Mobius into letting reality collapse for his own benefit. But Renslayer reminds Mobius, equally as perplexingly, that that won't happen unless the Timekeepers decree it, as he should know. Yeah, I guess he should know that after a lifetime of working in this organisation. But wait, does Loki have to be evil? Does the titanic existentialism that comes with awareness of the TVA not change people? Does living within the TVA not change people? My point is that the TVA exists outside of the sacred timeline and is under the power of the Timekeepers in a formal sense only, as we see in the courtroom scene in episode 1, where Renslayer wants to condemn Loki, then changes her mind to let Mobius use him for his mission. I don't think I saw any indication of the Timekeepers decreeing such an important decision to her, but my question is, does Renslayer recognise that she made that decision? Because if she does, the statement that Loki won't change unless the Timekeepers decree it is kind of fucking bizarre. Ooh, what's that? I'm admitting that Loki would change as a result of being in the TVA? Well, yeah, he probably would change, but he'd still be Loki, as opposed to the lobotomy patient this show is about. Mobius asks how the Timekeepers are doing, and Renslayer asks how he thinks they are, but Mobius says he wouldn't know because he's never met them. Renslayer says that they're monitoring every aspect of this case, she's never seen them so involved, and they want the variant caught. She says this is the last chance Mobius gets with this Loki, and sorry, am I going insane? Am I making up that he very nearly let reality collapse, and then justified it by saying it was worth it to know Loki variants will play for time? Because no one should be acting like that's fine. You're willing to give him a second chance? The fabric of reality is at stake. Fuck me. Anyway, this is the last chance Mobius gets with Loki, and he and Renslayer flirt some more until Mobius goes to leave. Renslayer asks if Mobius trusts him, and Mobius says that Loki believes in himself enough for the both of them, but if he acts up, he'll delete him himself, and while opening the door, he whispers that Loki's really arrogant. Oh, Loki was within fucking earshot for that. Nice. Probably doesn't matter though. Mobius whistles and Loki jumps up like the little cocker spaniel he now is, grinning embarrassedly and saying, "You're probably wondering what happened on the mission," flapping his arms around and trotting behind him. In an effort to explain, he babbles that was the first lesson of catching a Loki, to expect the expected, since half the fun of being a trickster is knowing everyone knows you're a trickster and exploiting that you know that they know the fucking hell. You should be fucking dead, mate. Mobius should not be tolerating this. If this was a trick to get everyone to let their guard down, you clearly don't know what you're doing. Loki's told to shut up in the way one would scold a yappy little dog. Again, less than a day since the events of the Avengers, where he killed 80 people in 2 days, all of that. And Mobius, deciding now's the time to establish some authority, asks what happened to the guy in the elevator who didn't like to talk, moaning that all Loki does is go on about what makes a Loki tick. Loki, despite looking positively wounded for the entirety of that, asks if that's not why he's here. Mobius says no, he doesn't care what makes him tick. Loki's here to help him catch the Superior. Loki bristles and says he isn't sure that Superior is actually the right word. And Mobius says that this was his mistake. He believed that Loki's insecure need for validation would motivate him to find the killer, not because he cares about the TVA or being a hero, but because he knows the variant is better than him and he can't take it. Loki patronises him and says it's adorable to think Mobius could have possibly manipulated him. He's 10 steps ahead of him, and proudly admits that he's been playing a game of his own all along, and oh god! Why is he so cloying all of a sudden? This is so far away from how he usually acts when he's tricking someone. Even in the one where he's written by Taika, he wasn't fawning over the Grandmaster to this degree. What is it about Mobius of all people that's prompting him to bow and beg and scrape for approval? The fucking moustache? Mobius asks what his plan is, suggesting get in with the Timekeepers, hustle them, then seize control of the TVA, and asking if he's getting warm. Loki visibly deflates at the notion that Mobius guessed a double cross by history's most reliable liar, then, with his personality long gone at this point, acknowledges defeat, asking why he's sticking his neck out for him. Mobius says he'll give 2 options, and he can believe whichever one he wants. A, because he sees a scared little boy shivering in the cold and he feels sorry for that ice runt. Or B, he just wants to catch the variant and he'll tell Loki whatever he needs to achieve that. Loki feebly says he doesn't need his sympathy, and Mobius says that that's good, because he's running out of it. Loki is on his last chance. Loki asks what is expected of him, and Mobius says, work. Sorry, but I still don't get what Loki fans are getting out of this on any level. This isn't the character this show said it would be about. Sure, you can absolutely claim that he's doing a trick, but I can think of exactly 0 examples where Loki's absolutely debased himself to this level for the sake of fooling someone. Whether he's trying to trick Nick Fury, or Black Widow, or Odin, or Thor, or Hela, or the Grandmaster, or Thanos, he always has an air of self-respect no matter what. Even if he doesn't hold all the cards, he'll always try and project the idea that he does. But even aside that, this is so not Loki's MO. He never wants to make himself look like a fool for everyone to see. Instead, his strength is in being selective in when he draws attention to himself. Throughout his appearances in Avengers and Dark World, his trickery is built around making a big intimidating entrance, then fading into the background when he needs to bide his time and wait for the perfect opportunity. Then when that opportunity appears and his target's distracted and off balance, he'll make his move. He shouldn't be undermining himself so thoroughly in front of new people. He shouldn't be telling them how his powers actually work. He shouldn't be taking just any old dead-end opportunity and giving his targets an idea of what he wants. He should be taking this opportunity to sit back, say little, watch, and, as the script pays lip service to, listen. Then when the variant attacks and makes a scene, he'll make his move, apply some pressure, and turn the tables. So not only is he acting so differently to his established character that anyone with even a passing familiarity with him should be on high fucking alert, i.e. everyone he went to Wisconsin with, his gambit in the earlier scene should have logically resulted in his death, meaning not only is he acting in such a way that should telegraph a trick to anyone with enough brain cells to rub together, he's also seeming to be unwittingly putting himself in danger of being unceremoniously disintegrated, and logically should be. But no, I guess. Even though the TVA have been established to be a zero-tolerance, no-nonsense operation whose function is to maintain something as cosmically crucial as reality, and you surely do not have any room to fuck around at all, they now allow these two men, who nearly torpedoed the TVA's entire reason for being, to swan about with gay abandon and absolutely no supervision to do as they please. This organisation does not make sense. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. Absolutely everything we see of their operations are incongruent to their primary function. This fucks with the verisimilitude of the story. I cannot get immersed in this show when every character acts against how they should be acting at literally every turn. And yes, you might be able to, but that really isn't the rebuttal you think it is. Apologise to the cinematic universe you fucking ruined, show. Mobius gives Loki his assignment, to go over each of the variants' case files with his unique Loki perspective, to keep a lookout for any things they may have missed. Loki scoffs, saying they've definitely missed something due to all being idiots, which is true, and Mobius leaves him at a desk with paperwork to go through, telling him to pretend that his life depends on it. Cut to later, with Loki flicking through the case files and mocking the TVA for continually being defeated by the variant. He is told to shush by the librarian, then turns around and tells her to shush instead. Fucking hate this. Cut to Loki going to bother another lady at her desk, and after some tedious business with a bell, he asks for the origins of the TVA and the beginning and ends of time, only to be told that they are classified. He is then taken to a file about Asgard, and the details of the apocalypse showing zero variance energy cause him to have an epiphany. Loki scampers off to Mobius and says he found something, only to be slapped back down like a child with Mobius saying, "No, I told you not to bother me until you read all the files." Loki says the answers aren't in the files, they're on the timeline, and that the variant is hiding in apocalypses. Mobius points out that there are like 1,000,000 apocalypses, and wants to know which one. Here, Loki re-establishes that Nexus events happen when someone does something they're not supposed to do, which cascades into a whole range of other things that aren't supposed to happen, until a new timeline branches. Mobius characteristically tells him that isn't quite the case, offering chaotic alterations of a predetermined outcome, which illuminates precisely nothing and sounds like exactly the same thing, but with big boy words. Loki very hilariously demonstrates his theory by oversalting Mobius's salad, saying that if he went down to Asgard right before Ragnarok, he could do anything he wanted. Surtur would destroy Asgard regardless, illustrating this by pouring Casey's stolen juice box all over the now ruined salad. Loki is momentarily excited about figuring this out, then concedes that it was a clumsy metaphor when Mobius puts his grumpy face on, deciding to over-explain that whatever the method of apocalypse, the logic still stands that no action will cause a branch in the timeline since everything around you will be destroyed. Therefore, that's where the variant is hiding. And honestly, this is actually the longest scene in the fucking universe. The idea that Loki deems it necessary to ruin a salad to summarise a concept as simple as this, anything you do in an apocalypse won't create a branch since everything will be destroyed anyway, is just another item on the growing list of Loki being fucking pathetic, while also wasting my time for a joke that's equally fucking pathetic. Eager to take his master out for walkies, Loki suggests going to test the theory, and Mobius very rightly points out that he's not going somewhere with Loki and allowing him the opportunity to stab him in the back, implying that Mobius now considers him to be a threat. Only now. Loki looks offended, saying that stabbing someone in the back is the most boring method of betrayal. Mobius points out that he studied almost every moment of his entire life, though not enough to know that Loki has a tendency to play for time, he needs to be around him in person to know that, and says that he's literally stabbed people in the back like 50 times. Loki says he'd never do it again since it got old, and Mobius laughs. Then Loki points out that he loves to be right, and that's enough to cut to them having travelled to Pompeii, alone. Honestly, I have no words for how inconsistent Mobius is. Nah, you ain't that lucky. Agent Mobius establishes himself early on as being intensely familiar with Loki's past, present and future, and uses that to spend episode 1 ridiculing him for 13 minutes. Then, for some reason not even thinking of Loki as a threat, the Loki expert pulls Loki close to him long enough to be pickpocketed, then leaves him free, alone and unguarded in a place where he could easily hide and ambush him. Despite that, Mobius then starts episode 2 perplexingly saying that he doesn't consider Loki a threat when he has access to his magic again, since he knows Loki ultimately wants an audience with the Timekeepers, despite the fact this does not necessarily mean he won't kill them and take their shit. Then halfway through the episode, switches, working off his familiarity with Loki's treacherous character to decide that he's going to play it safe and not accompany him without any backup. Then, between cuts, switches again, and accompanies him, alone and unguarded, to another point in time without any backup or witnesses on the strength of Loki saying he loves to be right. What is this fucking character? Shit. In a word, the character is shit, and Loki should have killed him far before this. Anyway, they time travel to Pompeii, and the plan is laid out. Loki will fuck about publicly while Mobius monitors whether it generates any Nexus energy, though he himself admits that this plan has the potential to cause a major branch from the sacred timeline, yet another reason compounding against his decision to come here alone. His reasoning for letting Loki do this, because he admitted that he loves to be right, is not justified whatsoever. Like shit, Renslayer's already letting them do whatever they like despite nearly torpedoing reality 10 minutes ago. You're telling me getting permission to do this in a more controlled manner's out of the question? Poof! I say, poof! While Loki yammers on excitedly, Mobius emphasises that they are not meant to be there. They should start with small disturbances, and asks if Loki can mimic bird sounds. Yeah, I don't know either. Loki rightfully scoffs at this, runs into the middle of the village, loudly releases a trailer of goats, proclaims himself and Mobius as agents of the Time Variance Authority, and warns the citizens of their imminent death via volcano. And he should know, since he's from the future. Then checks if the TVA is from the future, because, you know, it seems very future-y. Can you imagine handing this in to someone as a serious script, like with your name on it? The volcano explodes, and as Loki continues to prance around, Mobius realises that his theory was right. None of that generated any variance energy whatsoever. Loki continues to pat himself on the back, comically taking no notice of the rapidly approaching pyroclastic flow, Galadriel style, baby. So Mobius, now with the knowledge that Nexus energy can't be generated in an apocalypse, gets to work. But for this to hold, the disasters have to be naturally occurring, sudden, no warning, no survivors. Loki asks how many of those there could be, and Mobius says they're gonna find out. Cut to Loki comically asleep on a desk while Mobius does paperwork. Mobius somehow channels my soul while watching this and yawns, suggesting they go for a walk, and we cut to them sitting in the canteen, where Loki asks about the jet ski magazine that he had on his desk previously. Mobius says jet skis are awesome. Most things in history are kinda dumb, and everything gets ruined eventually. MCU. But in the early 1990s there was a beautiful union of form and function, which we call the jet ski. But he's never been on one, because a TVA agent on a jet ski in the sacred timeline would create a branch for sure. Dude, of all the things we've seen you do this episode alone, some mustachioed old bellend riding a fucking jet ski is gonna create one? You almost let Loki talk bollocks so hard he nearly destroyed reality, you galactic turbo wanker. Anyway, Loki asks why he reads about them instead of having fun, and Mobius says it's a reminder of what they fight for. Loki exasperatedly says, "You really believe all this stuff, don't you?" And in response, Mobius continues to be incapable of answering a question directly. He doesn't get hung up on believe, not believe, he just accepts what is. Loki lays out the ridiculousness of 3 time lizards creating the TVA and everyone in it, saying that every time he starts to admire his intelligence, he says something like that. It's then that Mobius retorts, "Well, who made you, Loki?" And Loki should say, "My biological father, Laufey." Instead, Loki says the exact thing that will play into Mobius's premise, and says, "A frost giant of Jotunheim." Mobius asks who raised him, and Loki should say, "My adoptive father, Odin." But Mobius says, "Odin, god of the heavens, Asgard, mystical realm, beyond the stars, frost giants." It's exactly the same thing, because if you think too hard about where any of us come from, who any of us truly are, it sounds kind of ridiculous. Are you serious? Loki was fucking born like everyone else, you spatula-headed twat. Odin and Laufey were actual people that influenced your sacred timeline. At least Loki can say that both of you have seen who created him, unlike you, but I guess you get to be the smug one since he decided not to answer the questions in a way that he actually would. Existence is chaos. Nothing makes any sense, so he tried to make some sense of it. Pal, it was all making a lot more sense before you got involved. Eat an absolute mile of shit. Loki tries to make some sense of it himself. So it's all written. Past, present, future. There's no such thing as free will. Well, I mean, it's an oversimplification. Loki, can you just grab his tie and beat the shit out of him against the table until he answers a goddamn question? Say yes or fucking no, you smug twat. Also, yay, someone actually acknowledges that no one's had free will in the MCU up till now. Isn't that brilliant? Loki comes to the conclusion that only those at the TVA are actually free, and Mobius asks where he's going with this. Loki asks how it all ends, and Mobius says that it's a work in progress. Loki asks what the Timekeepers are waiting for. Mobius says that while the TVA protect what came before, the Timekeepers are toiling away, untangling the epilogue from its infinite branches. Loki asks what happens when they're finished, and Mobius says the TVA will be over. No more Nexus events, just order, and we meet in peace at the end of time. Loki brings up how Mobius has called him a lot of things, like a scared little boy, but the thing is, Loki knows something children don't. That no one bad is ever truly bad, and no one good is ever truly good. A-tier dialogue, this. Way to make Loki, the 1500-year-old god of mischief, feel like a toddler telling another toddler about this cool thing he just discovered called moral ambiguity. Completely oblivious to Loki's barely veiled point about his naivety, Mobius repeats, scared little boy, like he's just figured something out, and calls Loki very clever, to which Loki happily says, I know, a holdover from episode 1 that was apparently good enough to be its own running gag. Later, Mobius goes on a tangent about the bubblegum being in a previous Nexus event. Wait, why is Loki clever because you connected things you saw in your head? What he said was laughably simplistic, actually. Anyway, Mobius says the bubblegum is a brand that was only sold regionally on Earth from 2047 to 2051. All they need to do is cross-reference it with every apocalyptic event ever, so back to paperwork. But not just regular paperwork, oh no. Competitive paperwork. As they trawl through paperwork to be the first one to find where the variant is hiding, Loki spots it. Alabama, 2050. He shows Mobius the file, and he smiles and says that Loki will take his job if he's not careful, and Loki veritably beams at the compliment. I can't work up the anger anymore, and we're not yet done with episode 2. Cut to Mobius requesting Renslayer's clearance for a fully armed unit to investigate the potential hiding spot of the variant. Fully armed. Renslayer's very incredulous at this suggestion, despite this variant literally being their biggest issue right now. Besides the one Mobius nearly let destroy the sacred timeline. And Mobius explains that the hiding spot is a corporation-owned town that's wiped out by a hurricane, extrapolating that the variant must use the supermarket as a food source and campsite that they can just return to whenever they please. Renslayer points out that this was all based on a theory by the Loki who blew his last mission. Can you say understatement? And Mobius says that he's doing great. Renslayer cautions Mobius not to trust him, but Mobius points out that Loki has just uncovered a huge hole in their security. That's another thing though, you guys have been in charge of the sacred timeline since the beginning, and none of this ever occurred to you? Wait, why would the Timekeepers or whoever keep this a secret from the TVA? Did they not know either? Surely someone should question their omnipotence in that case. But if they do know, what's the benefit of having your security not knowing it? And I hear you, episode 6 watchers. The Timekeepers have wider plans for this variant. It makes sense. But I'm not talking about this variant. Imagine a hypothetical variant, who, for whatever reason, can elude the TVA like this one can. Even this useless Loki can beat Hunter B-15 in a fistfight, meaning that they're woefully ill-equipped to deal with anyone who they can't just sucker punch. From what I've seen of their abilities, I don't believe that the TVA have never been eluded before. And considering how easily you can steal a TemPad that has no kind of ID security whatsoever, I'm dubious at best that in the however many millennia they've existed, the TVA have never ever had to work this out. Anyway, Renslayer says she's not comforted by the fact Loki's uncovered this huge hole in their security, but Mobius doubles down and says that he's got a good feeling. This Loki's going to be the key to nailing this variant, winning Renslayer over somehow by saying that she's never seen him so excited. Renslayer acquiesces to his request, but cautions that there's not a lot she can do if it doesn't work out, because reality will have collapsed, and a multiversal war will have broken out, presumably. Mobius leaves the office and says that they're on, complimenting Loki again on his good work. Loki is excited, asking if this means he'll get an audience with the Timekeepers, nakedly showing his hand again. Mobius, with his head in his locker, says, "One step at a time, my friend," and just hands Loki his knives. Are you fucking serious? You've studied his life. He has backstabbed people like 50 times, man. You said that. Do you remember when you said that? Luckily, B-15 sees this retardation and quickly snatches Loki's knives back off him, putting them in her locker and telling the group to huddle. She describes the layout of the supermarket, as well as the warehouse that people are sheltering from the hurricane within. She then says the variant shouldn't know they're coming, but could be anywhere, and will be hostile. Then says to stay alert, as opposed to not doing that. Actually, maybe it's good to keep reiterating that for these guys. B-15 says that every time they're attacked, the variant steals a reset charge, so must be planning on something, so to keep an eye out for the charges, and if they see a Loki, prune it. Loki adds, the bad Loki preferably. Cut to the apocalyptic hurricane of 2050, where the team enter the supermarket in heavy rain, and not, somewhere inside the supermarket. Loki uses his magic to dry his clothes, and B-15 demands to know what the hell that was. Loki explains it so that he doesn't announce himself with squeaky footsteps, unlike the rest of them. Seriously, you guys are such a fucking joke. How have you maintained order in this multi-dimensional universe for so long when you're not even robots? B-15 instructs the team to sweep the storm shelter. Mobius says he and Loki will go and check out the greenhouse, but B-15 says no. Oh my god, does B-15 actually have a brain? B-15 then says Mobius will go with another grunt, while she goes alone with Loki. Whoops, guess not. Mobius says that Loki's under his supervision, and B-15 says that this is her field operation, and assuming that Mobius doesn't consider him a threat, she says it won't be a problem. But Mobius says of course he's a threat, and asks if she remembers what happened to her in his office. I can see why she thought you didn't consider him a threat, Mobius. You went to go and give his knives back to him. And why, after saying he's backstabbed people 50 times, are you so ready to walk off with him alone and unguarded and without any witnesses or backup? More to the point, why is B-15 so cool with doing the exact same thing, especially after he managed to fuck her shit up last episode? He's capable of magic that we just established you're unfamiliar with. Do you not want backup? Why are you both acting like backup is not an option? Are you both stupid? Oh, I misread that. You are both stupid! Loki assures Mobius that he can trust him, and understands that he has to earn that, so he will. Mobius asks why it's always the people you can't trust that are always saying trust me, despite literally everything Mobius has done all episode. Then he jabs at B-15 by saying to try and hang on to her time collar this time, then they all disperse, while the variant watches them on the surveillance. Before they leave, they set up a timer for 20 minutes. Cut to Loki and B-15 walking through the flower section. Loki perplexingly decides this is the best time to try and mend bridges with her, and B-15 rightfully shushes him, because she's just noticed a person. She readies her melting stick, and asks Loki if that could be a him in disguise. Loki examines him, and says he'd have probably worn a suit, but ultimately he wouldn't have any way of knowing. B-15 approaches, melting stick first, and wouldn't you know it, it was someone under the variant's mind control spell, and B-15 just had to get so close to him that he managed to transfer that mind control to her. Do you see how having a ranged weapon may have had several utilities? Do you see how extra backup may have had several utilities? The man free of the mind control drops, and Loki asks if he's dead, as if Loki would ever care about the life of a pathetic human. B-15, under the spell, says no, they usually survive, then turns to Loki and points him out as the fool the TVA brought in to hunt me down. Loki, quick-witted as ever, stands there for a good few seconds, mouth agape, and then says, me, I presume? And B-15 says, please, if anyone's anyone, you're me. Loki says he's pleased to meet them, and they trade sinister grins, and had any of the stuff surrounding this been worth a damn, I might have cared, but it isn't, so I didn't. We cut to the warehouse, where Mobius and his team are searching the survivors for the missing reset charges. While Mobius lambasts a grunt for being too rough with the people, another grunt enters the scene. He has found C-20, bound and in a trance, repeating that it's real. Later we'll find out that she gave away how to find the timekeepers to the variant. Back with Loki and the variant, Loki identifies her mind control as enchantment, calling it amateurish and cowardly, but clever, ignoring how he used the Mind Stone to basically achieve the same end. The variant says that enchantment is almost as cowardly as working for the TVA. Loki says he's working for himself, and the variant laughs, saying that they're worried the TVA had found a better version of them. Boy, did you have nothing to worry about. A random staff member shows up and asks if they need help finding the disaster shelter, and the variant passes the enchantment to him. Loki, forgetting that he's a villain and that he doesn't even fucking like B-15, moves to tend to her, but decides to quiet his stupider impulses and keep his eyes on the variant until they leisurely pace away, at which point Loki kneels down at B-15's side, seeming to check if she's still alive. Guys, come on, say it with me. Villain! Loki tries to get the variant on side by mentioning that it wasn't easy gaining the TVA's trust. Is that seriously what you were trying to do? Because that absolutely did not seem to be your plan, like, at all. Anyway, Loki tells them he's intending to overthrow the Timekeepers and could use a qualified lieutenant, as if he'd settle for that offer. The variant smiles at this, and Loki doubles down, saying that he's been trying to help them, and admits he was waffling on about nothing as long as possible earlier to keep the TVA vulnerable so the variant could strike. The variant says that was nice of him, but they'll be refusing his offer since they're not interested in ruling the TVA. Noticing a reset charge, Loki asks if what they want is to lure the team here and blow them all up, then is blindsided by another enchanted bystander, who, despite only having human strength, starts beating the shit out of a fucking Jotun who beat up Captain America. I guess the variant transfers his Jotun strength to whoever it's enchanted, but I don't remember that being a feature of the Mind Stone, so I guess enchantment, despite being amateurish according to Loki, is more powerful than an actual Infinity Stone? Oh, fuck it. A shit fight ensues. Instead of using magic or illusions to fight, Loki instead taps into the 1,000-odd years he spent learning how to fight alongside Thor, and opts for a Roomba and then a vacuum cleaner as his weapon of choice, which he then ends up getting choked with before being thrown across the room. After finding himself being taunted by a plastic dog, he angrily approaches the variant, who is setting up a device. As he approaches, the bystander faints, and Loki turns to see the variant, a female Loki, who informs him that this isn't about you. Did you just steal that from Doctor Strange? I know you can't seem to help yourself stealing Glorious Purpose, but fuck me. Not being able to write dialogue yourself doesn't give you carte blanche to recycle old lines from your better predecessors. Loki, absolutely flabbergasted, can only stand around dumbly as the device shuts down all the lights, and one by one the reset charges are teleported to locations unknown. At the TVA, we see that multiple branches are splitting from the sacred timeline, and someone describes it as having been bombed. But what is this actually doing? The reset charge in episode 1 disintegrated the area Loki had been, but also presumably reset a Loki and a Tesseract back in 2012 Avengers Tower to preserve the sacred timeline. They didn't show it, probably because doing that would make it easier for people to see how this particular scene doesn't make sense, but seriously, are the reset charges melting random people, but also resetting another version back to where they were in the process, leaving the sacred timeline intact? You know, like how every other one has been explained to work? Like literally what they've been designed to do? Like it's literally in the name, reset charge? Shouldn't this be accomplishing nothing then? I'm confused. Are you going to show what they did? You're not! Right, okay, maybe they realised what they'd written was nonsense, but instead of writing something else, they just stuck with it and hoped everyone would take it at face value. If people aren't following, the variant's genius plan was going and finding anachronisms to lure out Minutemen to kill them and steal their reset charges, with the ultimate goal to set them all off at once to bomb the sacred timeline, despite the fact that, as they've been shown to operate, many reset charges being set off at once will just reset the timeline back to the default, essentially causing no damage whatsoever. The show wants you to think this is a big deal, which stands as a testament to how hilariously ill-suited these writers are to this kind of material, since if the variant wanted to actually cause trouble for the TVA, she could have just gone and stolen a handful of grenades and sent them through to different points in time instead, since grenades just fucking kill people, and grenades killing many people at random points in time would necessitate the TVA to scramble around and fix the timeline. But as it is, the TVA would just show up at the sites where the reset charges have gone off and just find themselves with nothing to do. These are the rules you introduced, show, and you have fucked your own world building again within your second episode. This is fucking idiotic. You could perhaps make the argument that it's people's reactions that they perhaps have to deal with, but one, we never see how reset charges work in relation to onlookers, so we literally do not have enough information to go on there. Two, if reset charges are limited to a finite radius and can be noticed by onlookers, this is yet another way the TVA can't function. What if a Nexus event takes place in a crowded area, like a city, where a reset charge could easily be seen by someone even if they're not within the radius? 3, if the TVA have to go and prune people for seeing the reset charges go off, what do they do about the new onlookers who see them pruning people? The funny thing about Loki is that you can take any given issue, and the deeper you go, the more these problems just continue to compound on each other. Literally none of this fucking works, on any level. Anyway, the emergency power resets, and Loki watches his female variant unplug the stolen TemPad, then use it to escape through a portal. Loki sees Mobius and B-15 chasing after him, and after a moment of hesitation follows the variant through, and roll credits. So the variant's plan was, step 1, use anachronisms to lure out Minutemen, kill them, then steal their reset charges. Step 2, do that in 16th century France, give specific brand of anachronistic gum to a child, which will presumably get her killed. I don't know what this accomplishes unless you A, hate children, and B, want to be found, which I'm not sure why you would. Step 3. Activate all your reset charges at once, sending them to various points in time to bomb the sacred timeline, which will reset it instantly. meaning that you may as well have not done this at all. Set a timer up in case the TVA finds you before you've had a chance to gather all your reset charges, but ultimately the difference between setting off 1 or 1,000 reset charges off amounts to exactly the same result. Why? Why? Why any of this? Genuinely, the most idiotic story I've ever experienced. These writers were not equipped to do a story about time. It's hard enough when you're competent. But anyway, I'm sure the bombing of the sacred timeline will have enormous consequence going forward, whatever it did. You're going to explain what it did, though, like it'll be important moving forward, right? You're not just going to drop it, right? No, they actually do drop it. This never comes up again, and I'm not kidding. Honestly, I didn't expect episode 2 to be as densely awful as this. Behold, ye mighty, and despair. This is what the MCU had to be sacrificed for. Barely 2 episodes in, and this brand new premise has broken itself so thoroughly that I'm not sure how it got through more than 2 people in the editing process, or how people still perplexingly think it's among the best of the MCU. The world building is so hilariously incompetent that if it was its own isolated thing I could just sit and laugh at it for the bizarre, insanely idiotic tripe that it is. But it isn't its own isolated thing. This is the MCU, and the point it couldn't return from, because after all, how do you come back from something which fucks up the concept of time within your universe? This is 12 years of storytelling just thrown away because Mickey wants to see how little effort and investment he can put into the writing process and still turn a profit. And in time, when we look back on the history of the MCU, it's my sincerest hope that Loki is seen to be the straw that broke the camel's back. But can it get worse? Oddly, yes, because there's still 2/3 of this shit show left to untangle. But that's for another time. Many thanks to everyone for being patient with this one. The irony is not lost on me that Loki has 2 seasons in the time it's taken me to make 2 videos on it, but I'm essentially a one-man band for the most part. That being said, I will obviously be aiming to increase my output next year. I intend to follow a pattern of 1 MCU video, then 1 video on an actual film, and so on. The next video before Loki episode 3 will be on Alex Garland's Ex Machina, so stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.